No one paid attention to the maid until she opened her mouth. The city's most extravagant charity gala. 500 of the most powerful men in the underworld, masked in polite formalities, shaking hands and exchanging pleasantries. And in the middle of that magnificent hall, the young mafia boss, Damien Vescari, entered. Beside him, his own maid, dressed in a minimalist dress, without jewelry, without status. Laughter filled the room. Then she looked directly at each face and called them by their real names. Not their real names, but the secrets they had buried for 20 years. The laughter died down. This is the story of Serena Vale, the maid who knew too much to live. Like and comment the name of the city you're watching to let me know how far my story has progressed. Watch to the end, because tonight won't end the way anyone thinks. The dress didn't fit right across the shoulders. Serena noticed it the moment she stepped out of the car. A slight pull along the seam when she moved her arms, fabric that had been cut for someone taller, someone with a longer neck and a straighter spine. She didn't say anything. She kept her hands clasped in front of her, the way she'd learned to hold herself when she was trying not to take up too much space. And she watched Damien Vescari straighten his cuffs without once looking at her. He was 29 years old and he moved like someone who had been angry for so long that anger had simply become the engine underneath everything, the thing that kept the blood moving, the lungs breathing, the jaw from going slack. He wasn't handsome in any way that was easy to describe. His face had been broken once across the nose and hadn't set clean, and there was a scar along his jaw that ran from the corner of his mouth toward his ear, like a sentence someone had started and never finished. He dressed well because men in his position had to dress well, or everything fell apart, but the suit sat on him like armor, not ornamentation. He finally looked at her. His eyes went from her hair to her shoes and back in under 2 seconds. "You'll walk in beside me," he said. "Not behind me. Beside." "I know." "You'll smile if someone speaks to you." "I know that too." He held her gaze for a moment like he was trying to locate the edge of something. Then he turned and walked toward the entrance, and she followed him, one step back, which was not what he'd said but was what her body knew to do in spaces like this. The Hargrove estate occupied 6 acres at the edge of the city's oldest residential corridor, a place where the money was so old it had stopped looking like money and had started looking like stone. The main house was the kind of building that announced itself without a sign, all pale limestone and arched windows, lit from the outside so that it floated above the grounds like something that had never been touched by weather or consequence. A dozen cars lined the motor court. Valets moved between them in silence. Serena stepped through the main entrance and the warmth hit her like a physical object. Candlelight, cut crystal, the layered smell of perfume and old wood, and something floral she couldn't name. The ceiling above the foyer was painted in pale gold, and the sound of a string quartet drifted from somewhere deeper in the house, each note landing clean and precise against the stone walls. She had cleaned this house. She knew where every room opened to, where the servants' stairs were hidden behind the dining room paneling, which window in the east corridor had a broken latch that nobody had fixed in 3 years. She had spent 4 weeks moving through these rooms at 6 in the morning before any of the staff arrived, running a vacuum along rugs that cost more than she would earn in a decade, and she had done it carefully and without thinking too hard about what it meant to put that much labor into a space you would never be invited to inhabit. Tonight was different. Tonight Damien had put her in a dress and brought her through the front door. She understood, in a broad way, what he was doing. He wanted to make a statement. He always wanted to make a statement. It was the one thing that felt consistent about him, this compulsion to occupy a room in a way that produced maximum discomfort in people who thought they already owned it. He had built his reputation on gestures like this, on arriving in places where he wasn't supposed to arrive, and behaving as though the discomfort of everyone around him was not his problem. His father had spent his entire life trying to earn a seat at this particular table. Damien had decided to kick the table over instead, but she hadn't anticipated the noise. The moment they stepped into the main reception hall, the sound shifted. It didn't stop. The quartet kept playing, the conversations kept moving, but something changed underneath it, a modulation, a recalibration, the specific frequency of a room full of people who had just spotted something they needed to assess before they decided how to respond. 500 people, roughly. She counted by section without meaning to, her eyes moving in a sweep across the room before she could stop them. Long tables draped in white linen along the north wall, a raised dais at the far end where several men stood with drinks, and the particular posture of people who had already decided the evening was going to confirm what they already believed about themselves. A cluster of women near the east windows in floor-length gowns, each one the kind of polish that required a team, and in between, the middle current of the room, the rest of them. Businessmen, city officials, people whose titles were legal and whose other activities were not. The laughter started somewhere near the bar. She heard it before she understood what it was. A specific quality of laughter, not the kind that came from amusement, but the kind that came from finding a way to announce to the people around you that you were not threatened. It spread. She watched it move through the room the way a smell moves, from table to table, person to person, and she understood without needing it, explained that they were laughing at her. Not at Damien. They wouldn't have dared at Damien, even him. They were laughing at the fact of her, this woman in a dress that didn't fit right, with no jewelry and no name they recognized, standing beside a man who had apparently run out of appropriate company and decided to bring the help. Damien felt it too. She could tell by the set of his shoulders, the very slight angle of his chin as it lifted. He wasn't embarrassed. He was pleased. This was exactly what he had come for. A man materialized from the crowd. Broad, silver-haired, with the ruddy complexion of someone who had spent decades sitting in rooms where decisions were made and had absorbed the ambient heat of all those decisions into his skin. He extended a hand to Damien with a smile that was calibrated to within a millimeter of sincerity. "Biscari," the man said. "Good of you to come." "Rollins." Damien shook his hand once, brief, efficient. "You look well." Rollins' eyes flicked to Serena. The smile didn't change, but something behind it shifted, and she recognized the shift. The way a person recategorized you from subject to object without being aware they'd done it. "And you've brought the help," Damien said. His tone was perfectly pleasant. She wanted to see how the other half lived. More laughter from somewhere nearby. Rollins permitted himself a small, indulgent smile, the kind you'd give a child who had said something unintentionally funny. Serena looked at Rollins. She looked at the shape of his face, and something moved in the back of her skull. Not quite a memory, not quite recognition, but something in between, like finding a word on the tip of your tongue that you haven't used in years. The feeling was familiar to her now. It had been happening more in the past 3 weeks since she'd started working in this house. Flickers. Impressions. The brain trying to match a face to a file it wasn't sure still existed. She said, "Mr. Rollins?" The man blinked. "Yes?" "Thomas Edwin Rollins, chairman of the Aldgate Foundation." She paused. "And the non-executive partner in the Meridian Consortium. The offshore account in the Cayman structure, the second one, not the first. That one's registered to a company called Harlan Pacific. Your wife doesn't know about that one." The silence that followed wasn't like the laughter. The laughter had been shapeless, ambient, easy to ignore. This silence had a shape. It occupied space. It pressed against the walls of the room, and the people nearest them stopped their conversations without quite understanding why. Rollins had gone very still. His smile was still technically in place, but it had lost all connection to anything happening underneath it. Damien was watching her. She could feel it. Not a glance, a sustained, focused attention, the kind of looking a person did when they'd just seen something they hadn't expected and needed to figure out what it meant. She moved before she made a conscious decision to move. She stepped away from Damien, further into the room, and the crowd parted around her the way crowds parted around people who had just said something that no one had fully processed yet. A woman near the east windows. 50s. The kind of beauty that had been expensive and was still paying dividends. She wore a necklace of pale green stones that Serena thought were probably real. "Mrs. Calloway." The woman's head turned. "Elena Calloway, née Strand. You were born in Reston, not Brussels. You changed that in 2008 when you needed a different tax status. The business in your daughter's name. The arrangement with the Fontaine family regarding the Eloise distribution routes." Serena said it evenly, the way you might read a grocery list. "I'm not judging. I just remember." Elena Calloway had a champagne glass in her hand. She didn't drop it, but her knuckles went white. Serena kept moving. A man near the dais whose name came to her like a headline. Marcus Bren. 3 shell companies. A municipal contract in the Port District. An associate who had disappeared in 2019 in a way that had never been formally investigated. Beside him, a man she placed as Yuri Shazan, whose family connection to a weapons brokerage ran through a cousin listed on no public record she should have been able to access. She said their names, she said their things, not loudly. She didn't shout, didn't perform. She moved through the room like someone finishing a task they'd started a long time ago, and the room came apart around her in real time. The laughter was entirely gone. In its place, something else settled. A collective stillness that was the opposite of calm. It was the specific silence of people who have just realized they are in a room with something they cannot manage, and their usual tools, money, position, the backing of other dangerous people, are not relevant to the current threat, because the current threat is not trying to take anything from them or impress anyone or prove a point. The current threat is simply remembering. Damien caught up with her near the center of the room. He closed his hand around her upper arm, not hard, but firmly enough to halt her momentum, and he turned her so she was facing him. His expression was the most honest she'd ever seen it, stripped of the calculation and the deliberate performance, something underneath showing through that she thought might be alarm. "What are you doing?" he said. Not a question, an accusation. "I'm not sure," she said, which was the truth. "Where's this coming from?" "I don't know." "You don't know." He looked at her for a long moment. Around them, the crowd had reorganized itself, people shifting to the periphery, giving them space without being asked, the way people arranged themselves around things they sensed were volatile. "You're my cleaning staff." "I know." "You're here because I wanted to make a point." "I know that too." "Not this point," he said. His voice had dropped. "Whatever point you just made, but that wasn't the one I was going for." She understood. He had wanted to embarrass the room by bringing someone they'd dismiss. He had not wanted to detonate it. "I can't unsay it," she said. "No." He released her arm. He looked out across the room at the faces looking back at them. The calculating ones, the frightened ones, the ones that hadn't decided yet which feeling to have, and she watched him update his position in real time, the way a very good chess player absorbed a change to the board. "No, you can't." "I don't know why I know those things," she said. "I've been trying to figure that out for 2 years." He looked back at her. 2 years. Since the hospital. She kept her voice level. "I woke up and I didn't know my own name. I still don't know how I know theirs." Something moved through his expression. She might have called it recognition if she'd been certain what he was recognizing. He didn't say anything for a moment, and she used that moment to glance toward the exits, an old habit she'd never been able to trace to a source. There were men at both exits who hadn't been there 20 minutes ago, not servers, not security in the ordinary sense, men who stood the way men stood when they were waiting for a signal. "Damien," she said. "I see them. The ones by the east door and the one at the top of the service stairs." He'd already clocked them. She could tell by the way he didn't visibly react to her saying it. "How many more?" he said, without moving his lips much. "2 near the bar that are watching us, not the room." She kept her eyes on his face while she counted peripherally. "One behind Rollins who wasn't there when we arrived. Rollins called someone." "He's faster than I thought." "They all are. They made calls while I was talking, while I was still moving through the room." She felt something cold settle behind her sternum, a sensation she had no word for but that her body understood completely as a signal to alter behavior. "They were not laughing by the time I reached Bren." "No," Damien said. "They weren't." Across the room, Thomas Rollins was looking at them with an expression that had nothing diplomatic in it anymore. Beside him, Elena Calloway was speaking quietly to someone with a phone in his hand. Marcus Bren had shifted his position so that 2 larger men flanked him, the kind of instinctive protective repositioning that people did when they'd assessed a situation and decided it was past the point of conversation. The string quartet was still playing. That struck Serena as slightly surreal, the music continuing while the room reorganized itself around a new and violent mathematics, everyone working out simultaneously whether the most dangerous thing in this space tonight was the young man in the good suit or the woman in the borrowed dress who had just publicly disassembled their most carefully kept secrets. "We should move," she said. "Where?" She thought. The layout of the house came to her in precise detail, not hesitantly, not in fragments, but with the clean, sudden totality of something she'd always known. There's a door behind the north table that connects to a butler's pantry. The pantry has a back passage to the kitchen. The kitchen has a loading access on the south side of the building. They won't have covered that yet. Damien stared at her. "You cleaned this house for 4 weeks." "Yes. And you memorized the floor plan." "I memorize everything," she said. "I don't choose to. It just stays." He held her gaze for another second, and she could see him deciding something, recalibrating his understanding of the evening in real time, reassigning her from a position on the board he'd already calculated to one he hadn't anticipated needing. "Okay," he said. "We move. Stay close." They had taken 4 steps when the main entrance opened. The man who came through it was not tall, but he carried himself in a way that made the room behave as though he were. He wore a dark jacket and no tie, and he walked without urgency through the parted crowd as though he had been invited to arrive at precisely this moment. His face was narrow, the eyes set wide and light-colored, the kind of face that suggested patience in the way a stone wall suggested patience. Not softness, just endurance. Serena stopped. She did not stop because she recognized him, or because her body registered him as a specific threat. She stopped because something else happened. A sensation she had been chasing for 2 years, a feeling like a door that had been sealed finally developing a crack of light under its frame. And in the space of 3 seconds she remembered something. Not everything. Just enough. A room, a desk, a man with light-colored eyes speaking to her in a low, precise voice. "You will be the only person on this earth who knows all of it. If something happens to me, Serena, you will be the record. You will be the only thing that can't be burned." The name hit her like a physical impact. Not the man's name, the name of who she had been. She had not always been Serena Vale. She had been something else first, someone who had sat in that room and listened and remembered and never once been permitted to write anything down. "Damien," she said. Her voice came out lower than she intended. He had felt her stop. He turned. "What?" "That man by the entrance." She kept her eyes on the narrow face across the room. "He was there. The night before I woke up in the hospital. He was in the room." Damien followed her gaze. Whatever he saw in the man's face, it wasn't nothing. His jaw tightened slightly. "That's Crane," he said, quiet. "He runs point for the Continental Council. He doesn't make personal appearances." "He's here for me," she said. "You don't know that. He's looking directly at me, and every other person in this room has looked away." Damien was quiet for a moment. The music continued. Crane continued to look at her from across the room with those wide, light eyes, and she could not tell from his expression whether he was glad she was alive or relieved that the problem of her being alive was finally, here in this room, going to be resolved. The exits were closing. She could see it without looking, the body language of the room shifting, the men at the perimeter moving incrementally, the circle drawing in. Rollins had his hand at his side, but his fingers were twitching near his phone. Someone in this room was going to give an order in the next 2 minutes. And when they did, Serena Vale, the woman who woke up in a hospital without a name and had spent 2 years mopping floors and trying to forget that everything she looked at refused to leave her memory, was going to find out exactly how much her life was worth to the people who already knew who she really was. Damien's hand found her wrist, not her arm this time, her wrist, lighter, something almost careful in it. "Don't run," he said. "If you run, they'll know we know." "I know," she said. "And for the record," he said, still watching Crane across the room, his voice so low only she could hear it, "you are not the help. I don't know what you are, but you are not that." She had no answer for it. The chandelier above them was very bright. The string quartet began a new piece. Crane took 1 step forward through the crowd, and Serena's hands, steady, she made them steady, the way she'd made herself steady for 2 years without knowing why it had always come so easily, went still at her sides, and she made herself wait. And in the silence underneath the music, she felt the edge of another memory beginning to surface, rough and broken and carrying the smell of smoke. Crane didn't rush. That was the thing about him, the thing Serena's body registered before her mind could articulate it. He moved through the crowd the way water moved through a crack in stone, not forcing anything, just finding the path of least resistance and following it with the particular patience of someone who had learned long ago that urgency was a form of weakness. He smiled at two people he passed. The smiles didn't reach his eyes, but they didn't need to. They served their function, and he moved on. Damien's hand was still on her wrist. She could feel his pulse against her skin, faster than his face suggested, which told her something about the gap between what he was showing the room and what was actually running through him. "Butler's pantry," she said, quiet. "Not yet. He's 40 feet away. I know how far he is." "Then, if we move now, we split the room and everyone watches us go." His thumb pressed once against the inside of her wrist. Brief. A signal she hadn't asked for but understood. "Stay. We need 30 more seconds of looking like we belong here." She made herself look away from Crane. She picked a point on the far wall, a painting, some dark pastoral landscape in a heavy gilt frame. And she focused on it and breathed through her nose and let her face do the thing it had apparently always known how to do, which was reveal nothing. 20 seconds. Rollins had moved. She caught it in her peripheral vision. He had drifted toward the dais where 3 other men were standing, and the configuration of their bodies had changed, tightened, the posture of people arriving at a shared decision. 15 seconds. The man she'd identified near the bar, the one who'd been watching them rather than the room, had shifted his weight forward onto the balls of his feet, not moving yet, but ready. "Now," Damien said. They moved together, not quickly, not the way frightened people moved. They moved the way people moved when they were simply bored by a party and looking for the kitchen. Serena set the pace because she knew the layout, and he let her, which surprised her. She hadn't expected him to cede that kind of control without argument. The butler's pantry door was set into the wall behind a long buffet table, painted the same cream as the surrounding panels so that you wouldn't notice it if you hadn't been the person to open it every morning for 4 weeks carrying a supply caddy. She pressed the latch without breaking stride, and they stepped through and she pulled it closed behind them, and the noise of the party became muffled and the air changed, cooler, smelling of old wood and cleaning solution and something metallic underneath. Damien let go of her wrist. In the narrow space between shelves of silverware and stacked linen, with the single overhead bulb casting its flat light, she got her first unguarded look at his face. He was furious. Not the cold-managed fury he wore in the main hall. This was something rawer, something that hadn't had time to get organized yet. His jaw was tight, and there was a muscle moving beneath the skin near his temple, and his eyes, when they found hers, had the specific quality of someone who had walked into a situation they'd constructed and found it had been rebuilt around them without their knowledge. "Talk," he said. "I told you. I don't know. Not about the memories." He kept his voice low, but there was no softness in it. "About Crane. You said he was there the night before the hospital." "I said I think, don't qualify it. Was he there or wasn't he?" She thought about lying. The reflex was there, she could feel it, the impulse to soften the answer, to give herself room to be wrong. She didn't take it. "Yes, he was there. I don't have the whole picture, but I know his face was in the room, and I know the room was—" She stopped. The fragment was there, but it kept breaking apart when she reached for it, like ash. It was ending. Whatever was happening in that room, it was at the end of it. The end of what? "I don't know yet." Damien looked at her for a long moment. In the silence, she could hear the muffled movement from the party. Footsteps, the low current of rearranged conversation, the string quartet still playing its careful, irrelevant music. "Lucian Graves," he said. The name landed differently than she expected, not like a revelation, more like a bruise being pressed. She felt it more than heard it. "Where did you hear that name?" she said. "My father said it once in my entire life. He said if anything happened to him, if the families ever moved against him, there was a man named Lucian Graves who had an arrangement in place that would protect us." His voice was flat, factual, but something underneath it wasn't either of those things. My father died 6 months later, and I spent the next 15 years believing the families had nothing to do with it. Serena's hands were cold. She pressed them against the fabric of her dress and felt how wrong the seams were along the shoulder and focused on that specific physical sensation because it was the only thing in the immediate environment she could fully trust. "Lucian Graves is dead," she said. "I know. Wait, he died the same night I ended up in the hospital." Damien didn't move. "How do you know that?" "I don't know how I know it. I know it the same way I know Rollins' account number and Shazan's cousin's name. It's just in there." She tapped the side of her head, a gesture that felt inadequate for what she was trying to describe. "He died and I survived, and I don't know why either of those things happened." "Someone tried to kill you both." "Yes." "And Crane was there." "Yes." "And everything Graves knew—" He stopped. She watched him work through it, the calculation moving visibly across his face. "He didn't use files. I heard that. The old men talked about it. Graves kept nothing written. He said if it existed on paper, it could be taken." "He was right about that," she said. "So where did it go? When he died, where did everything he knew?" He looked at her. She looked back. The understanding arrived in the space between them without either of them having to say it. "You," he said. "I think so." "You were his secretary?" "I think. I have impressions of a desk and documents, but I never touched the documents. I only—" She stopped again. The word came from somewhere she didn't have conscious access to. "Read them. Once each." That was apparently enough. Damien put one hand flat against the shelf behind him. He breathed through his nose in a long, measured way that she recognized as the same technique she used when she was trying to keep something contained that wanted to be larger and louder than the situation allowed. "You're a human vault," he said. "I don't know what I am. Every agreement, every blood oath, every financial arrangement every family on the continent has made in the last— I don't know how far back it goes. But it goes back." "Yes." He was quiet. From beyond the door, she heard something shift in the party's ambient sound. A new note in it, lower, more purposeful, feet moving with direction rather than the casual drift of social circulation. "They're looking," she said. "Let me think." "We don't have time for let me think." Not loud, not a shout, just a very hard stop, and she gave it to him. And in the 10 seconds that followed, she watched him stand in the bad light and process something that was clearly dismantling several things he'd believed to be true about the shape of his own life. When he came back, he was different. Not softer, more focused, the way a fire got more focused when you remove the things that were creating smoke. "My father's murder," he said. Don't tell me you don't know. You know everything Graves kept." "I know what I was shown," she said carefully, "and I don't have access to all of it. It comes in pieces when something triggers it. I can't just—" She moved her hand, trying to describe the mechanism. "Pull from it on demand. It's not like that. But it's in there." "Yes." "And Graves knew about my father." She looked at him. She wanted to give him something careful, something measured, but she'd spent 2 years being careful and measured, and she was standing in a butler's pantry with men moving toward her on the other side of a painted door, and she was tired of careful. "Yes," she said. "Lucian Graves knew about your father. I don't have the whole shape of it yet, but what I have—" She stopped. "Damien, what I have suggests you've been looking in the wrong direction for 15 years. He didn't react the way she expected. He didn't get louder or hotter. He got very still, in the way of something absorbing an impact before it decided what to do about it. Then the door opened. The man who came through wasn't Crane. He was younger, broader, with a face that hadn't finished deciding what it wanted to look like. And he moved with the specific bad energy of someone following an instruction he hadn't been given enough information to carry out confidently. He saw them, and his hand went to his jacket. Damien moved before she'd finished processing what was happening. It wasn't elegant. It was fast, and it was efficient, and it was over in about 4 seconds. Damien inside the man's reach before the jacket was open, one sharp controlled application of force to the arm, the man's body using its own momentum against itself. a sound she'd rather not have been close enough to hear, and then the man was down in the narrow space between the shelves, and Damien was standing over him, breathing slightly harder than he'd been a moment ago. He looked at her. Go. She went. The passage to the kitchen was 20 feet of narrow corridor with a low ceiling and exposed pipe running along the left wall, and she moved through it fast with Damien 2 steps behind her and the sound of voices from the party, now clearly differentiated from the quieter, more directed sounds of men covering a building. She knew that sound too, apparently. She filed that knowledge away for later. The kitchen was empty except for 2 catering staff who looked up from what they were doing and received a look from Damien that caused them to find other things to focus on very quickly. She was already across the kitchen and at the loading access door when she heard the footsteps in the passage behind them. They had someone in the back, Damien said. He wasn't winded. He sounded almost annoyed. Of course they had someone in the back. She pushed through the loading door into the cool outside air, and the night came at her all at once. The smell of wet asphalt and distant exhaust. The specific ambient sound of a city that didn't know or care what was happening in the lit-up house behind her. 2 catering vans were parked along the service drive. Beyond them, a low stone wall, and beyond that, the grounds. Damien pulled out his phone as he came through the door behind her. He sent something, 2 words from what she caught, and then put it away. Car will be on the south gate in 4 minutes, he said. 4 minutes is a long time. I know. They moved along the building, staying in the shadow of the wall, the gravel quiet under their feet. The night air was cold, and she became aware for the first time that the dress had no sleeves, and that she was shivering in small, controlled increments she was trying not to let be visible. They were near the east corner when she stopped. What? Damien said instantly. Someone's already at the south gate. He followed her gaze. Across the grounds, at the far end of the service road, a figure standing where the light from the gatepost caught the edge of a dark jacket. The figure was not moving, but it was facing them. That's not my car, he said. No. How many exits does this property have? 4 that I found, she said. Main entrance, south gate. The east wall has a pedestrian access near the old greenhouse, and there's a vehicle gate on the north side that's padlocked, but the padlock is a standard. The greenhouse. Yes. They changed direction. Behind them, she heard the loading door open and she didn't look back. She focused on the path across the grounds. Wet grass, a low hedge line, the dark shape of the greenhouse 50 meters away and to the left. She was running now, and the dress was wrong for running, and her shoes were wrong for the grass. And she made a decision somewhere between the hedge and the greenhouse structure and pulled off both shoes and left them because they were not hers anyway. The glass of the greenhouse was dark. She found the pedestrian gate in the wall beside it, iron, older than the house, with the kind of latch that was simple enough if you knew it. And she worked it with both hands while Damien stood at her back. They're at the corner of the building, he said, quiet. I've got it. Serena. I've got it. The latch gave. She pushed and the gate swung and the smell of the city came through the opening. Damien went through first, not because she needed protection, she understood, but because he was the one who knew what was on the other side. She followed and pulled the gate shut behind her, and the sounds of the estate fell away, and they were on a narrow lane between the estate wall and the back of another property, long grass growing in the center of the track, somewhere a cat registering their presence with brief alarm. They moved. Neither of them spoke. She was barefoot on cold tarmac, and she was carrying 2 years of other people's secrets in a brain she hadn't chosen, and she was following a man she'd spent 4 weeks cleaning around, who had just used her like a chess piece without understanding what the piece actually was. And she was not angry about it because there was no room yet for anger, and also because she thought she might have done the same. They came out of the lane onto a side street, and Damien's phone went, and he answered it with 1 word and listened and said a number and put it away. 2 blocks north, he said. There's a car. Crane, she said. What about him? He's not here for the families. Damien kept walking. Explain. Everyone else in that room, when I started talking, they were afraid. They pulled back. They started making calls. She was watching the street as she walked, the cars, the corners, the lit windows. Crane didn't do any of that. He came forward. He wanted to contain you. He wanted to see me. She thought about the expression on that narrow face, the wide, pale eyes, the specific quality of stillness. He wasn't surprised I was there. He wasn't surprised I remembered things. He was... She tried to find the right word. He was checking, like someone who lost something and needed to confirm it had been found. Damien stopped walking. She stopped beside him. "Say that again," he said. "He was there when Lucian died. He knew what I was, what I carried. And when I disappeared afterward, he thought the archive was gone. Yes, everything Graves had built, the record, gone." She looked at Damien's face in the streetlight. "Until tonight. Until I started saying names in the middle of a room full of people, and it became very obvious that the archive wasn't gone at all. It had just been cleaning houses and not remembering it existed." The car was a black sedan, idling. Damien moved toward it, and she followed, and they got in, and the driver didn't speak, and they pulled away from the curb, and she watched the side mirror as the estate's lit windows shrank behind them. "Crane organized the attack," she said, "the one that killed Lucian. You're remembering pieces." She pressed her fingers against her temple without meaning to. "He's counsel. He's been counsel for 20 years. And Lucian knew something about him. Something that would end him. Something that would end more than him." She turned to look at Damien, and the city lights moved across his face. "Your father knew too. That's why he's dead." The car was quiet for a moment. "You don't have the proof yet," Damien said. "Not all of it. But it's in there. I can feel it the way you feel She stopped. The analogy she was reaching for was too intimate to say out loud. "It's there. I just need something to unlock it." "What kind of something?" She shook her head. "I don't know yet. In the room tonight, it was faces, voices, the way someone stood." She looked at her hands in her lap. Bare, cold, the dress still wrong, the city going past outside the window. "Crane's face started something. There's a room I almost had. There's a name I almost..." Then she felt it. Not a memory. Something else. The car slowing. The driver's shoulders, the angle of his hands on the wheel, the way he hadn't spoken or confirmed a destination. She looked at Damien. He was already looking at the driver. The car had turned south. Damien's safe house was north. The doors locked with a sound that was very small and very final. And in her chest, something cold and definitive settled into place, and she understood, with the same clean certainty that had let her walk through a room of 500 dangerous people and name every secret they were carrying, that the man who had arranged to pick them up outside that estate wall had not been working for Damien Vescari at all. Damien hit the partition, not with his fist, with the heel of his palm, flat and hard, twice, and the sound it made in the sealed car was ugly and immediate. The driver didn't react. The car kept moving south through streets that were becoming less familiar, the storefronts changing character, the streetlights further apart. "Stop the car," Damien said. "Nothing." "I said stop." "Mr. Vescari." The driver's voice was even, almost apologetic, the voice of someone reading from a script they found mildly distasteful. "Please remain seated. The ride will be brief." Damien looked at the door handle. Serena watched him calculate speed, impact, the likelihood that the doors were locked on a mechanism he couldn't override from inside. She'd already run the same calculation and arrived at the same answer. "Don't," she said. "I wasn't going to." "You were thinking about it." He said nothing, which was confirmation. He settled back against the seat, and she watched him run through the same reorganization she'd done the moment the locks engaged, stripping out the plan that no longer existed and trying to construct something from what remained. What remained wasn't much. No weapons she could see. No phone signal. She'd checked hers when she felt the car turn, and the bars were gone, which meant either a dead zone or something built into the vehicle. A man in the driver's seat who had been positioned before Damien made the call, which meant the call had been monitored, or the number had been compromised, or both. The city outside the window had thinned to warehouse blocks and loading aprons, and the long, flat dark of industrial parcels sitting between the river and the elevated rail line. She had not cleaned a house in this part of the city. She had no map for it. "Who does Crane use for transport?" she said. Damien looked at her. Why? Because this car was waiting before you called. Someone knew we'd come out of the estate. They positioned for it. She kept her eyes on the back of the driver's head, the specific tension in his neck, the way his heat sat at 10 and 2 with the careful placement of someone who'd been told to appear unthreatening. Crane doesn't do his own logistics. He delegates down. He uses whoever the local council sanctions. Who is the local council's transport coordinator? Damien's jaw shifted. Reyes. Felix Reyes. He runs 3 legitimate courier companies and about 8 that aren't. And Reyes reports to council. A pause. He reports to the full council through the operations chair. Who is? Damien stopped. She watched it arrive on his face, not surprise, not quite, but something adjacent to it. The specific expression of a person who has just found a thread and pulled it and felt something much larger than they expected begin to move. Say it, she said. Rollins, he said. Thomas Rollins chairs operations. Rollins, who you have been cultivating a conflict with for 3 years. Yes. Rollins, who you humiliated tonight by walking into his party with me. Yes. So Rollins didn't call someone when I started talking. She held his gaze. He confirmed with someone who already had this in motion, someone who knew we'd be at the estate tonight before we arrived. The car slowed. They'd come off the main road onto a service track running alongside a warehouse structure. Corrugated metal, 4 stories. The kind of building that existed in every city in the world as a space for doing things that required the absence of witnesses. 2 other vehicles were already parked outside the loading bay. Their headlights were off, but their engines were running. She could see the faint exhaust curl in the cold air. The driver got out without speaking. His door closed, and then there was just the 2 of them in the locked car, with the engine idling and the sound of footsteps on gravel coming from outside. How many? Damien said quietly. She was already counting silhouettes. 4 outside, minimum. The building will have more. She watched the loading bay door. They're not moving fast. They have time. They think. Do we have time? Less than they think. The door beside Damien opened from the outside. A man she hadn't seen before, older, deliberate, wearing a coat that had been good once, gestured for them to get out with the minimal movement of someone who did not feel the need to perform authority because they already possessed it. They got out. The air smelled of river water and rust, and the specific chemical nothing smell of a space that handled things carefully. The gravel was fine and dark under her bare feet. She noted it, the sensation, the temperature, the small, sharp edges of it, because her body was doing what it did when it was preparing for the possibility that comfort was no longer a relevant category. They were walked inside. The interior of the warehouse was mostly empty. High ceiling, concrete floor, a row of sodium lights running along the center beams that cast everything in a flat yellow that made every face look slightly wrong. At the far end, near a cluster of metal chairs and a folding table that looked like it had been set up recently, Crane was waiting. He looked smaller inside the building than he had in the estate's ballroom. Or maybe it was the light. He'd removed his jacket and was holding a paper cup of something hot, and the contrast between the setting and the gesture, the mundane domestic object in the middle of this specific space, produced a dissonance that Serena found more unsettling than if he'd been holding a weapon. "Serena," he said. Not a greeting, an identification. She said nothing. "You're different than I expected." He studied her. 2 years, I assumed certain things. Cognitive regression, dissociation, the kind of fracturing that happens when a system goes through what yours went through. He tilted his head slightly. "But you walked into that party tonight, and within 4 minutes, you were reciting account numbers." "Why were you there?" Damien said. Crane looked at him with the patience of someone being interrupted by a sound they hadn't assigned significance to yet. "Mr. Vescari, we'll get to you. We'll get to me now." "Damien." Serena said it without inflection, just a pressure, and he felt it and was quiet, and she watched Crane register this exchange and file it. "You knew Lucian," she said. "I knew him for 31 years. And you killed him." The room was very still. 2 of the men who had walked them in were positioned behind and to the left, the other 2 at the periphery near the loading door. Enough distance that intervention would take seconds. Enough presence that the seconds would matter. Crane's expression didn't change. The situation Lucian created required resolution. The situation he created, she repeated. He built something that was never meant to be built, a single point of total systemic knowledge. He gestured with the paper cup, a movement that was almost professorial. Imagine a library that contains every document ever used to establish power in this city, in this country, on this continent, and imagine that library has no copies, no redundancy, no backup, just one repository. He looked at her. You understand the problem. He was the problem, she said. So you removed him. We removed the risk. He was a person. He was a liability. Crane set down the paper cup on the folding table. He'd agreed to it, actually, in principle. The archive was always meant to terminate with his natural death. He was building toward a structured dissolution, passing elements back to the respective families over time. Controlled. Careful. A pause. But he found something he wasn't supposed to find. Something that changed his calculus. Your arrangement with the Voss consortium, she said. The room temperature didn't change, but something in the quality of the air did. Crane looked at her with those wide, pale eyes, and for the first time since she'd seen him across the ballroom, the patience in his expression developed a hairline fracture. You remember that, he said. 17 accounts, 3 intermediary structures, payments distributed across 9 years timed to conflict events. She said it the way she said everything, flat, factual, without performance. Every time 2 families went to war with each other, the Voss consortium profited from the weapons supply contracts. And every time the Voss consortium profited, a percentage moved through structures that terminate with a holding company registered in your wife's maiden name. The silence that followed was the longest one yet. One of the men behind her moved. A shift of weight, an adjustment of position, and Damien turned his head toward the movement with a speed and a quality of attention that made the man stop. Crane said carefully, How complete is your recall of that structure? Complete enough? You'd need documentation to but I don't need documentation. She looked at him steadily. I am the documentation. Crane looked at her for a long time. She didn't look away. This is why Lucian died, Damien said. He wasn't asking. He was placing pieces on a board out loud, the way people did when they needed to hear the configuration to believe it was real. He found out Crane was running both sides, funding the wars while sitting on the council that was supposed to prevent them. Crane didn't confirm or deny. He didn't need to. The confirmation was in the specific quality of his silence, the silence of someone who has stopped calculating whether to lie because they've assessed that the lie is no longer structurally viable. And my father, Damien said. The words landed differently. Not louder. Damien's voice had actually gotten quieter, which was somehow more present than volume would have been. The warehouse seemed to adjust around it. Crane looked at him. Marcus Viscari knew, Damien said. He'd been told, by Lucian or by someone Lucian trusted. He knew what you were doing, and he was going to... He stopped. His chest rose and fell once, controlled. What was he going to do? He was going to take it to the full Continental Assembly, Crane said. He had documentation, physical documentation that Lucian had prepared against my express direction. The patience was back in his voice, but it was a different kind now. Thinner, more effortful. Your father was a principled man, Mr. Viscari. In this particular business, that's not a compliment. He was murdered. He was managed. The word hit Damien like a physical thing. She saw his body absorb it. A slight backward shift of weight, a recalibration, the body doing what it did when the mind received something it didn't have a category for yet. She watched his face, and she saw the 15 years underneath it. Every wrong door he'd kicked in looking for the people who'd taken his father. Every alliance he'd built or burned based on a false map. Every morning he'd woken up aiming at a target that had been constructed specifically to redirect his attention. Who did you tell him to aim at? She said. Crane looked at her. Damien, when his father died. The families he blamed. You told him who to blame. Crane said nothing. You managed his grief the same way you managed everything, gave him a target, kept him occupied. She heard her own voice, and it was steadier than it had any right to be. 15 years of a man pursuing the wrong people so that he'd never have enough attention left over to look in the right direction. Damien was very still now. She was watching him the way you watched a structure that had just taken damage, not to see if it fell, but to locate the point where it had changed. His hands were at his sides, and there was something in his stillness that was worse than movement. "Say something," she said, quiet. "I'm fine," he said, which was the most obvious lie she'd heard all evening. "You're not." "I'm functional. That's enough." Crane had been watching this exchange with the attention of someone assessing collateral conditions. Now he straightened, and the two men near the loading door moved in response to some signal she hadn't caught. A shift in his posture, a small change in the angle of his shoulders. "This is a significant conversation," Crane said, "and I mean that genuinely. What Serena carries in her memory represents the most comprehensive record of criminal governance in the modern era. It is, in the right hands, an instrument of extraordinary utility." He paused. "I want to propose something reasonable." "You want to propose something," Damien said. "An arrangement. Serena works with us, not as a prisoner, as a partner. What she knows is valuable enough that there are structures currently in place across 6 countries that would be destabilized overnight if it became public. We have a shared interest in calibrating how and when that information surfaces." He looked at Serena. "In exchange, you get a life, a real one. New identity, new documentation, resources. You have spent 2 years cleaning other people's houses." "She's not a tool," Damien said. "She absolutely is," Crane said, not unkindly. "So are you, Mr. Vescari. So am I. The only question is which hand holds us." Serena looked at Crane. She thought about the hospital room she'd woken up in 2 years ago. The white ceiling, the specific quality of the light, the nurse who told her she'd been found in an alley with no identification and significant head trauma. She thought about the 2 years of waking up every morning and not knowing who she was, filling the absence with work and routine, and the uncomfortable, inexplicable experience of knowing too much about every room she walked into and every person she met. She thought about the estate's carpets and the silver she'd polished, and the way Damien Vescari had never once looked at her before tonight, as though she were a person worth accounting for. She thought about Lucien, the room, the voice. "You will be the record." She thought about what it meant that she was still alive when he wasn't. "The safeguard," she said. Crane went still. "Lucien told me something. Before." She watched Crane's face. Not just what he knew. "He told me what to do with it." "Serena." Crane's voice had changed. The professional composure was there, but it was working harder now. "Whatever he told you in his final—" "A chain of agreements," she said, "coded. Structured so that if they were ever released simultaneously to the right parties, the accounting of who financed what conflict and who sat on which council while those conflicts ran would be undeniable." She looked at him. "He built a trigger. He gave me the trigger. And I've had it in my head for 2 years without knowing it was there." The loading door opened. 4 more men. Crane said, "Find it for me." "No." "Serena, I need you to understand the position you're in." "I understand it." "Then you understand that being uncooperative right now is not a choice that—" "I understand that you need me alive," she said. "You've needed me alive since the moment you realized I was still walking around. Dead. I'm nothing. A body with no documentation, but alive?" She held his gaze and felt something shift in her own chest. Some weight that had been sitting there for 2 years moving, rearranging, settling into a shape that was harder and more angular than what it had replaced. "Alive, I'm everything Lucien built, and you can't access it without me, and you can't destroy it without destroying me, and you've been trying to figure out how to do both for 2 years, and you still don't have an answer." Crane looked at her for a long moment. Then he looked at the men near the loading door and said a single word she didn't catch. Damien moved. She didn't see the beginning of it. She was watching Crane, and then Damien was already in motion, crossing the space between himself and the nearest man with the particular efficiency of someone who had spent many years having no choice but to be good at this. The room went loud and physical all at once. Impact sounds, a shout, the concrete floor conducting vibration through her bare feet. She ran toward the table, not away from the men, toward the table, toward Crane, who hadn't moved and was watching her approach with those wide, patient eyes and one hand moving toward his jacket. She reached the table before he reached the jacket. The paper cup went over. Hot liquid across the table and Crane's forearm, and his attention broke for 1 second toward his own hand, and she hit the underside of his wrist the way— She didn't know how she knew this. She didn't know what training or memory this came from. The way you hit it to interrupt the grip, and the thing he'd been reaching for clattered against the concrete, and she kicked it toward the loading door, away from everyone. Crane grabbed her arm. His grip was strong, genuinely strong, not the grip of a man who had hired others to do the physical work. There was history in his hands, years of it. "The trigger," he said. His voice was completely even, which was the most frightening thing about him. "Tell me the trigger. Let go of me. Tell me." She twisted, changed her weight, tried the same thing Damien had done in the pantry with the geometry of a body against itself. But Crane had felt that technique before, and he adjusted, and her shoulders screamed, and her knees hit the concrete, Her knees hit the concrete, and the pain was immediate and specific, not the blunt shock of impact, but the sharp particular complaint of bone on stone with nothing between them. And she used it. She used it the way she'd apparently learned to use discomfort, which was as information rather than instruction. The pain told her where her weight was. It told her that Crane's grip on her arm had shifted when she went down, that his center of gravity had followed her toward the floor by approximately 6 inches, that the angle of his hold had changed from controlling to compensating. She dropped her shoulder completely, not resisting the grip, surrendering to it, going lower than he expected, and the sudden absence of resistance pulled him forward, and she turned inside the pull and drove the back of her skull upward into his face. She felt the impact through her entire spine. Crane made a sound she hadn't heard from him before, involuntary, unmanaged, and his grip broke and she was on her feet before she'd decided to stand, the world tilting briefly and then resolving, the flat sodium light of the warehouse coming back into focus. Her head was ringing. She didn't care. Damien had cleared 2 of the men near the loading door and was working on a third with the concentrated grimness of someone doing a job they're good at, but don't enjoy. The 4th man was moving toward her from the left. She grabbed the folding table. It wasn't a conscious tactical decision. Her hands found it, and her body did the math. The man was 6 feet away and closing. The table was metal and 4 feet wide, and she swung it sideways in a short arc that connected with his leading arm and redirected his momentum into the concrete pillar behind her. The sound was bad. She didn't look at him after. Crane was on one knee, one hand over his nose, blood dark between his fingers in the yellow light. He was looking at her with those wide, pale eyes, and in them she saw not fear. Something that was possibly the closest Crane could get to surprise. The recalibration of a man who had built his assessment of her on the 2-year image of a woman mopping floors and discovering that the image had been wrong in a fundamental way. "The trigger?" he said again. His voice was wet now, and the evenness in it was costing him something. "Stop asking." Damien reached her. He was breathing hard. Not winded, she noted, just running hot, the body at operational temperature. There was blood on the side of his neck from somewhere, a cut above the ear she couldn't fully see, and he moved to put himself between her and the loading door as 2 more men came through it. "We need to go," he said. "The door on the north wall," she said. "Behind the—" "I see it. There's a fire exit beyond it that connects to the rail service road. How do you—" "I don't know how I know it. Go." They went. The north door was padlocked, but the padlock was cheap, and Damien solved it with the length of metal pipe he'd picked up somewhere in the preceding 30 seconds without her noticing, and then they were through it and into a narrow maintenance corridor that smelled of machine oil and old concrete and the distant cold of the river. Behind them, she heard Crane's voice, reorganized now, the blood in it controlled, giving orders in a measured sequence. He wasn't chasing them personally. He was directing. She ran barefoot on concrete that was colder than the gravel outside and rougher, and she didn't slow down. The fire exit was where she'd known it would be, and they hit the bar and the door opened onto the rail service road. A long flat expanse of cracked asphalt running between the warehouse row and the elevated track above, lit by nothing except the ambient glow of the city, reflecting off low cloud. No people. The river smell was stronger here. They ran north along the service road. "Phone," she said. "Still dead." "How far to a street?" "Quarter mile. Maybe less." He was keeping pace beside her easily. She was not keeping pace easily. The concrete had done something to the soles of her feet, and the dress was wrong for this, and her head was still ringing from the impact with Crane's face, but she kept running because the alternative was stopping, and stopping was not available. How many people does Crane have access to? In this city? Damien's breath was controlled. 50, 60. He can call on council resources. So the railroad ends at a street, and the street is covered. Probably. Then we don't go to the street. He looked at her sideways while running, which she found somewhat impressive. Where do we go? She looked up. The elevated rail line ran above them. Old infrastructure, probably freight, the kind of track that the city had built around and then forgotten. She could see the maintenance ladder on the nearest support pillar, orange with rust, bolted to the concrete. "Up," she said. "That's a rail line." It's an elevated service road. The line runs into the central freight yard. The yard has vehicle access. "You know this because I know this because I know this." She was already at the ladder. The rungs were cold and rough, and the rust came off on her palms, and she climbed anyway, hand over hand, the wind coming off the river hitting her harder as she got higher, the dress doing absolutely nothing for warmth or mobility. She heard Damien on the ladder below her. She came over the top of the railing onto the service walkway that ran alongside the track, and the height hit her. Not fear, just a somatic registering of the drop on either side. The cities spread out below in amber and gray, the warehouse roofs and the river and the thin line of Crane's vehicle headlights moving along the road they'd just left. Damien came up beside her and looked out at the city for exactly 1 second, which was 1 second of something that might have been wonder in another context, and then he looked at the track. "Walk or run," he said. "Walk." She looked at his face, at the blood drying above his ear, at the jaw that had been tight since the warehouse and hadn't released. "Your father." "Not now." "When?" "Not now, Serena." She let it go. She started moving along the walkway, the track to her left, the drop to her right, the wind cutting through the thin fabric of the dress with complete indifference to the situation. Her feet hurt. Her shoulder from Crane's grip was developing a complaint she was choosing not to acknowledge. Below them the headlights turned. "They've found the service road," she said. "How long to the freight yard?" 15 minutes walking? Running? 8. But we'd be... She looked at the walkway surface. Visible, up here against the skyline. "They already know we went up. I heard Crane redirect." She started running. The walkway was uneven. Metal grating in some sections, poured concrete in others, the transitions between them without warning. She caught herself twice on the railing when the surface changed and her bare feet didn't register the difference fast enough, and she kept moving because there was an absolute instruction from some part of her that had decided the only relevant measurement was forward. Damien was behind her, and she could hear him, and that was enough. Knowing the sound of him, the rhythm of it, the specific cadence that told her he was running but not running from, which was a distinction she understood without being able to fully articulate. 2/3 of the way along the elevated line, she stopped. Damien almost hit her. He caught himself on the railing. "What?" "Listen." The wind, the city below, and above both of those, from somewhere ahead on the walkway, footsteps. Regular, paced, not running. Someone who had already arrived at the position they wanted and was waiting. "They had someone on the track," Damien said. "They knew we'd go up." "Crane! Crane!" She looked behind them. The service road below was lit by 3 sets of headlights moving north. Looking ahead, the walkway was dark between 2 light standards, and somewhere in that dark was a person standing still. "He put us here, pushed us up and put someone at the end." "How many at the end?" 1 set of footsteps." "You're sure?" "I'm not sure of anything. I think 1. Damien looked at the walkway ahead, then down at the drop, then at her. "How's your shoulder?" "Functional." "That's not what I asked." "It's what I have." He held her gaze for a moment. A brief, sharp assessment, the kind he probably didn't realize he was giving. Then he said, "Stay behind me. When I move, count to 3 and come through." "Damien, count to 3. He moved forward before she could finish the objection. She watched him move into the dark section of the walkway, and she counted. 1, with her heart at a pace she was pretending was normal. 2, with her hands flat against the railing, feeling the vibration of the structure in her palms. 3, with the sound of contact arriving from the dark ahead, not loud, not prolonged, and then Damien's voice. "Come through." She moved through. The man on the walkway was on the ground and Damien was standing, and she didn't stop to examine the specifics. She ran past and Damien caught up, and they came off the elevated line at the freight yard access point, a wide metal staircase bolted to a concrete base, the kind of infrastructure that existed in the gap between what a city planned and what it needed. The freight yard was dark and large, and smelled of diesel and rust, the ghost smell of years of industrial use. Chain-link perimeter, a guard booth that was unoccupied, the dark shapes of containers stacked in rows, and between them, vehicles. Trucks mostly. But at the south edge of the yard, a row of older cars that had been there long enough to develop a light layer of road dust. "Can you drive any of those?" she said. "I can drive anything with an engine." Second from the left has been moved recently. The dust pattern on the windshield is different from the others. He looked at her. "It means someone's been using it. Keys might be in it." They were. The car was a 10-year-old domestic sedan, blue, with a crack in the dash and a passenger seat that was stuck in the forward position that she folded herself into without complaint. Damien started it on the second try, and they drove out through the freight yard's north gate, which was open because freight yards in this part of the city had stopped caring about their own perimeters somewhere around the second year of the last recession. She put her feet flat on the floor and felt the car's heat beginning to work on her hands, and she looked at the city going past through the windshield and thought, "Where are we going?" Damien said. "I need something that triggers the rest of it. The rest of your memory." "The crane arrangement, the Voss Consortium. I gave him the outline, but I don't have the complete internal structure back yet. Without the complete structure, it's an allegation. With it," she stared at the road. "It's proof. The kind of proof that can't be managed." "What triggers it?" "Documentation. Something from that period. Something Lucian handled." She looked at Damien. "Does the name Harlan Pacific mean anything to you?" He didn't answer immediately. She watched his hands on the wheel, the grip, the slight tension in it. "My father's company," he said. "The one they hollowed out after he died. The one I spent 8 years trying to prove was stolen." She felt the impact of it arrive in her chest like something cold. "It wasn't Harlan Pacific in Rollins' account structure," she said. "I was wrong about that earlier. I was reaching for the right name and I got the shape of it, but not the—" She stopped. Something was moving in the back of her memory, the mechanism engaging the way it engaged, without warning and without consideration for timing. "The company in Rollins' structure that I identified as Harlan Pacific. That's not Rollins' company." "What do you mean?" "I mean the account structure I described. The Cayman registration, the holding company." She turned to look at him fully. "That structure doesn't belong to Rollins. Rollins was the access point, the chair. But the beneficial ownership of that structure, tell me." "It terminates with a holding registered to an individual, not Crane, not Rollins." She felt the name assembling itself from fragments, the way names had been assembling themselves all night, from pieces that had been sitting separate and inert until something connected them. "The beneficial owner is a man named Carver, Willem Carver." Damien's hands went tight on the wheel. "You know that name," she said. "He was my father's closest ally." The words came out of him slowly, the way words came out of people when they were being careful not to break something. "He was the man who told me which families had ordered the hit. He was the one who pointed me in the first direction." The car was very quiet. "He's the one who's been managing you," she said. "For 15 years, Damien said. "Yes." The traffic light ahead went red. Damien stopped the car and sat with his hands on the wheel and the red light on his face, and she watched him process the full weight of it. Not the facts of it, which she thought he was absorbing with the particular discipline of someone who had learned to manage devastating information as an operational matter, but the human dimension of it. 15 years of a man calling himself an ally. 15 years of grief directed by a compass that someone else had calibrated. 15 years of becoming exactly the kind of dangerous, controlled, relentless instrument that the person who destroyed your life would need you to become to serve their purposes. The light turned green. He didn't move. Damien. Nothing. Damien, the light. He drove. She watched his profile for the next 2 miles, and she didn't say anything, and he didn't say anything, and the city moved past them in its ordinary lit indifference, full of people who didn't know what was happening in this car, who would not know what was happening in this city's underworld until the consequences arrived in their newspapers or their taxes, or the specific way that certain kinds of violence always eventually arrived at the surface of civilian life, briefly and inexplicably, before retreating again. "Carver will know by now," she said finally. "Yes." "Crane will have called him." "Yes." "He'll be moving assets." "He's been moving assets for 15 years. Damien's voice had settled into something very flat and very final. "He knows exactly where everything is and how to cover it. Except for me. Except for you. I'm the one thing in this situation he doesn't have a protocol for." She thought about it as she said it, the particular position she was in, which was terrifying, and also, in some cold, analytical way she couldn't quite suppress, clarifying. Lucian built the safeguard specifically for a situation where the council had been compromised, where the standard power structures couldn't be trusted. He designed it to be activated by someone who had no power, no position, no documentation. She looked at her hands. "Just a very good memory. You said you needed a trigger. I need to see something from that period, something Lucian touched." She thought. His office. Whatever remained of his office after burned, Damien said. The fire that killed him. The building was destroyed. His storage, seized by the council within 48 hours of his death. He wouldn't have kept everything in the office. She pressed. A man who trusted nothing to computers, nothing to files, he would have had somewhere else. Somewhere that wasn't connected to him officially. Damien was quiet for a moment. "My father's building," he said. "The original Viscari offices. After my father died, Carver managed the estate. He said the building was sold." "Was it?" A pause. "I never verified it." She looked at him. He looked at her. "Carver would have kept access to anything useful in that building," she said. "Leverage, documentation, something he could use if the council ever turned on him." She felt the shape of it assembling. And if Lucian suspected Carver, if Lucian knew who the real architect was, he might have placed something there. In a building Carver controlled but didn't own. Something Carver would never find because he didn't know to look for it. "That building is on the east side," Damien said. 12 minutes from here." "Then we have 12 minutes?" "Carver has people everywhere." "I know." "If he's as covered as I think he is, I know." She met his gaze. "Drive." He drove. The east side of the city was the old part, the part that had been built before anyone thought about what the city was going to become, when the buildings were sized for a human scale that no longer applied. The streets were narrow, and the brick was dark, and the signage on the commercial ground floors was from 3 different decades, all layered on top of each other, like geological strata. The Viscari building was a 6-story brick structure on a corner lot, unremarkable, the kind of building that existed in every old city as storage for the things that hadn't been decided on yet. The ground floor had a roll-down gate. The upper floors were dark. Damien parked 2 blocks out and they walked. She was acutely aware of her bare feet on the pavement, the cold specific to wet urban stone at this hour, and she was aware of the dress and how wrong it was for everything that had happened since she put it on, and she was aware of Damien beside her, the controlled violence of how he moved through space now, the 15 years of misdirected grief that had been reorganized in the past hour into something more accurate and therefore more dangerous. The building's entrance was a recessed doorway with a mechanical lock that had been upgraded at some point with an electronic panel that no longer appeared to have power. Damien looked at the panel, looked at the mechanical lock below it. "I can do the mechanical, 30 seconds. 20, she said, and he looked at her. "We don't have 30. He worked. She watched the street. At 15 seconds, she saw the headlights. 2 vehicles, 1 block east, moving without urgency. They weren't racing. They didn't need to race. They had the position and they knew it, and they were arriving at it with the confidence of people who had been here before, who had planned for exactly this. "Damien, I need 10 more. 5. The lock gave. He had the door open and she was inside before she'd processed the transition. The building's interior dark and cold around them. The smell of old carpet and disuse, and underneath it something else. Paper, she thought. Or the ghost of paper, the way a library smelled after the books were gone. The headlights outside went still. She heard car doors. "Up," she said. "Which floor?" She didn't know. She moved toward the stairs anyway, because everything she'd been right about tonight had come from moving before she was sure, and she wasn't going to change the methodology now. Second floor was empty. Third floor, she saw it the moment she came off the stairs. A door at the end of the corridor with a different quality of lock than the other doors. Newer. Something that had been installed after the building changed hands, by someone who wanted access to one specific room and wanted that access to look like nothing. Damien got this lock in 12 seconds. The room inside was small, a desk, filing cabinet, and on the desk, in the specific stillness of something that has been waiting for a very long time to be found, a wooden box, unmarked, with a combination lock that was not electronic and not mechanical in any standard sense, but was the kind of 3-part cipher lock that she had seen in exactly one place in her life. In Lucian's hands. Her fingers found the combination without her mind supplying it. Muscle memory, or something deeper than muscle. Some record kept not in her brain but in the tendons of her hands. First wheel, second, third. The box opened. Inside, a single folded document, dense handwriting, small and precise. Her eyes moved over it and the contents arrived in her, not through reading, or not only through reading, but through the specific form of contact that she had apparently always had with text that Lucian had written. A directness of transmission that bypassed the ordinary processing of language and landed whole. She stood in the dark room with the document in her hands, and 15 years of buried evidence assembling itself in her mind with the cold, precise click of a mechanism completing its cycle. She heard footsteps on the stairs below. Multiple. Coordinated. Damien was at the door. He looked at her across the room with an expression she hadn't seen on him yet. Not calculation, not the managed fury. Something stripped of all of that, something that was just him, whoever that was under everything else, asking her with his face whether what was in her hands was worth what was about to come through the door. She looked back at him, and the footsteps got louder, and she felt the full weight of what Lucian had built, what he had trusted her to carry, what had waited 2 years in a damaged brain for the right moment and the right room. "It's everything," she said. The door at the end of the corridor came open hard, not kicked, shouldered, the way men came through doors when they wanted the person on the other side to understand immediately that the conversation was already over. 2 of them first, then a third, and Serena had the box in her hands and the document inside it, and nowhere to go except through them or through the window at the far end of the room, which was 6 stories above a concrete alley. Damien didn't wait for them to establish position. He went into the first man before the third had fully cleared the doorframe, and the small room became immediately too full of bodies and consequence. She pressed herself against the wall beside the desk and held the box against her chest and watched, and the watching was its own particular violence. Standing still while someone else absorbed the physical cost of a situation that was partially her doing. The second man got past Damien. He came at her directly, and she had maybe 2 seconds of processing time before he arrived, and she used the first second to decide not to move backward, and the second second to move forward instead, inside his reach, the box becoming the tool she hadn't planned for it to be. She drove the corner of it into the soft tissue below his rib cage and felt the impact travel up her arms, and he folded, and she stepped sideways and let him go down. Damien had the first man finished and was working on the third. The third man had a gun. She saw it before Damien did. The angle of the third man's arm, the way his body weight had shifted back to create distance, the specific intention in the movement that was different from the close quarters intent of the first two. She didn't think about it. She threw the box. Not at the man, at his gun hand. The box was heavy, solid wood, metal fittings, and it connected with his wrist, and the gun discharged into the ceiling, plaster dust raining down in the flat darkness. And then Damien was inside the distance, and it was over in a way she didn't look at directly. Silence. Dust settling. The smell of discharged weapon mixing with the old paper smell of the room. 3 men on the floor. Damien standing, breathing hard, blood from the cut above his ear freshened by the recent activity and running down the side of his neck in a thin, dark line. The box was on the floor near the door. She picked it up. The document was still inside, undamaged. "More coming," she said. "Yes." "How long?" Whoever was driving, 2 minutes, maybe less. He looked at her, at the box, at her face, at the document visible through the open lid. "Is it enough?" "It's enough to start." She closed the box. "But I need to be somewhere public to use it, somewhere with witnesses that Crane and Carver can't contain." "Where?" She thought about it for 3 seconds, and the answer came from the same place all the answers had come from tonight, which was somewhere below the level of deliberate thought, in the archive she hadn't known she was carrying. The Continental Assembly meets twice a year. The Eastern session started tonight. That's why they were all at the estate. It was the pre-session reception. She looked at him. "The Assembly proper convenes tomorrow morning at the Meridian Hotel. Every family's representative, every council member. Full session, recorded by charter requirement." Damien understood immediately. She could see it, the specific compression of his expression that meant a calculation had completed. "If you walk into that session, with that document and everything I carry in here," she touched the side of her head, "Crane and Carver lose the ability to manage the outcome. They can't disappear something that's already in front of the full assembly. They'll try to stop us before we get there. They'll try to stop us in the next 2 minutes. She moved to the door. "Come on." They went down the stairs the way they'd gone up, fast, no hesitation, trusting forward momentum over caution. And they came out the back of the building through a fire door she'd identified on the way in, into the alley behind the structure. The city's nighttime noise closing around them and the cold air hitting her bare skin, and she kept moving because stopping was still not available. The car was 2 blocks north. She heard voices from the front of the building as they cleared the alley's far end. Crane's people arriving at the entrance, finding the door already open, the building already yielding its evidence of recent occupation. They reached the car. Damien started it. They pulled away from the curb before the car had fully warmed, and she sat with the box in her lap and her bare feet on the floor, and she breathed. "Where do we go until morning?" he said. "Somewhere they're not looking." "That's everyone I know." She looked at him. "Not everyone." The caretaker of the Aldgate Foundation storage facility was 61 years old, had worked for the foundation for 22 years, and had absolutely no connection to any criminal organization on the continent because he was the kind of man who had spent his entire adult life being overlooked by exactly the kind of people who were currently looking for them.